Recording in progress.
Good evening and welcome to the January 8th, 2026 Louisville Planning Commission meeting. With a roll call, please.
Chair Brown Eyes,
Here.
Vice Chair Baskett,
Here.
Commissioner Choi,
Here.
Commissioner Hunt,
Here.
Commissioner Mahaley,
Here.
and Commissioner Ritchie.
Thank you. Motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then, is there anybody here who wanted to speak for public comment for items that are not on this evening's agenda? All right. Thank you. We will move into some procedural business here, beginning with an election of officers for 2026. If I could begin with a motion.
So moved.
Oh, you have to state who,
So do we make a nomination or do
Yeah.
we? Okay.
yeah.
So I'd like to nominate Commissioner Choi as secretary, Commissioner Baskett as vice chair, and Commissioner Brown Eyes as chair.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. And then roll call, please.
Commissioner Hunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Mahaley,
Yes.
Commissioner Brown Eyes,
Yes.
Commissioner Baskett,
Yes.
Commissioner Choi,
Yes.
Commissioner Ritchie.
Yes.
Thank you all. It truly is a pleasure to stay here. Thank you for the time being, at least. Appreciate it. And then moving into approval of posting location for the agendas and approval of the expected 2026 Planning Commission meeting dates, which will remain as the second Thursday of each month with a potential overflow 2 weeks after that for every month. Do you want to say anything?
Actually, to clarify, we have a special meeting planned for February 26th for the comp plan that's actually included on there, just so you're aware.
Okay.
Yeah. Like what you're voting on.
That, I would accept the motion for both of those.
I move that we approve the posting locations and the expected planning commission meeting dates that are in the agenda. Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving into our first item of real business, Louisville Comprehensive Plan discussion. It will be kind of freeform, and so we'll kind of follow the standard procedure on a certain level, but we'll make sure that we open it up for public comment and, maybe a couple of times if you want to speak to different issues as we work our way through it. We'll figure out how that works for all of us as we go through, but thanks for being here.
Okay, well, ready to go? Great, so I'm here to present on the comprehensive plan draft that's before you tonight. And so the specific purpose of the agenda item is to introduce you to what we're calling the 95% plan update draft in advance of forthcoming community sharing for information, and we'll talk about that overall process. And so in terms of where I guess the level that we're requesting input from Planning Commission tonight, we've been working on this for about 2 years, a lot of iterating. We've gotten policy direction from council. Our request tonight is to keep it at the sort of clarity, usability, major omissions level, not go line by line. But certainly we're open to discussion about some of the key policy questions that still remain in there as well. So just wanted to tee that up. The topics I'm going to cover, I have about a 15, 20-minute presentation. Just a warning, there's a lot of information to cover. Feel free to stop me if you want to break for questions. I'm happy to do that. I've got the questions teed up at the end. The first thing I wanted to cover was just a reminder of what the comp plan kind of is and isn't to get your head back into it. It's been several months since we talked about it. A bit of a process recap where we've been. We'd like to orient you to the document itself, so hopefully you've read it by now, but just to give you a sense of the structure and get your head kind of into how things work and the mechanics of the plan. We do want do a bit of a deeper dive on the future land use component of the plan in terms of future growth that is estimated out of that. And we also wanted to emphasize how this is sort of part of a continuum where there's a lot of things that are slated to happen sort of immediately after the comp plan for implementation, so you can see how the sort of trajectory is planned, and then we'll talk about next steps. So quick reminder of kind of what a comp plan is and isn't. So again, this is our sort of community-driven vision, our 20-year plan for future growth and development. It is a policy document. Important to remind everyone, it's not regulatory. This is not zoning. This is policy guidance for us in our decision-making. This does represent an update to the 2013 comp plan. And Planning Commission's role also, as a reminder, it is a codified role that you all make a recommendation to City Council on the comp plan. That is not tonight. That is scheduled for late February, and we're working toward that, hopefully. And so a recap, there's been several, I know it's been several months. We've been drafting the plan. That's why we haven't been before you as much. But there's been a lot of iterating with Planning Commission. I forget how many meetings there have been, but the last one was way back in June. Some City Council context, just to give you a sense of where they're at policy direction-wise on this. They did a really deep dive on a very early draft of the plan back in June and July of last year. They had two kind of back-to-back really lengthy meetings where they provided some pretty specific direction and policy direction. This draft reflects that direction generally. As far as the process for the plan development, it's all summarized in the plan in detail. There's snapshots in the plan, and then there's actually an appendix that summarizes kind of all the results from the input to date. It has been very good turnout. We've had 3 rounds of sort of focused engagement throughout. Another window is coming here soon we'll talk about. We engaged with all of our sort of subject matter experts and our boards and commissions multiple times, kind of on topics within their wheelhouse. I did, like I said, want to emphasize how this is sort of part of a continuum or a trajectory. I'll circle back to some of this detail later in the presentation, but again, this is really a foundation for us as a community, as a comprehensive plan for sort of all our city services, planning around infrastructure and investments, programs, rule changes, things like that. And we did really intentionally sequence this to follow the housing plan, which is one of our key policy documents to identify that need and how we can respond to it. And I'll talk a little bit more later about the things that are planned and budgeted and already underway to potentially implement this plan, particularly as it relates to some of the growth estimates and how we sort of maintain our level of service and our high quality of life, things like that. So how to use the plan, I'm just letting you know there's a graphic in there that I think is helpful, kind of depending on who you are as a planning commission, as a property owner, as a resident, as a city official, city staff, kind of helps guide you how to use the plan. But overall, it's our policy guide for a lot of decisions, including development review, PUDs, things like that, but lots of other things the city does. In terms of the structure of the plan, just to orient you a bit, if you had to take like one graphic snapshot of how it's all laid out, this would be it. And it's kind of hard to read. But it really starts with the vision statement and the core values. I'll remind you all of what was discussed on that front. And then the bulk of the plan is the policies, which are organized by plan element. That's sort of the topics that all the policies live within. And then there's an action plan. That's actually an appendix to the plan where it's like it calls out the specific things the city could or should do to implement the plan. Just a snapshot of the table of contents. You can see all the different plan elements and how it's organized. Try to keep it under 100 pages. Met that goal. Arbitrary, but helpful. Vision statement.
I mean, on that thing, that was a nice move. Yeah. Yeah.
The appendices more than make up for the lack of volume in the main body of the plan. So regarding the vision statement and core values, not going to read through them. Just to remind you, these were heavily vetted. They're not perfect, we know. You could endlessly wordsmith these, but these were affirmed by City Council, and we expect them to be carried forward, but open to suggestions certainly on that front. For the plan elements, again, the bulk of the planning document, just wanted to call your attention. We did make an effort in the plan to have if you don't want to read all 100 pages, there's really like 3 or 4 pages that you could flip open to and see sort of the big picture of what this says. This is one of those. So this summarizes, it's like page 30 or something. This summarizes all the different plan elements and all the different goals that live within each of the plan elements all in one place. So there's a lot of detail underneath this. So for each of those plan elements, there's how it's structured is there's the goal, and then there's the strategies to implement that goal underneath each of the goals. Important to clarify, this is said in the plan. I think a lot of people view this as a prescriptive list of like shall do, must do by the city. There's so much in here, so resource intensive. We really try to caveat it that this is not a prescriptive list. This is just sort of our guide, our menu of all the things as a city over the next 10, 20 years we could or should be doing to implement these goals. And then lastly, in terms of plan structure, the action plan is intentionally an appendix with the idea that we can update it ideally every 5 years-ish, with the sort of the short list of the biggest kind of most impactful things we can do from like a policy planning standpoint to implement this plan and make sure this plan's vision is kind of carried out and adapts. So here's what we didn't plan on getting into like a lot of the substance because there's so much, but we did want to do a deeper dive on the future land use framework and kind of tee up that discussion. So within the land use element, plan element, lies the future land use map that sort of acts as the policy foundation for how we want our city to grow, future land uses, things like that. And so the way that that part of the document is set up is the city is basically arranged by place types, so like future land use categories, each of which have their own sort of desired attributes in terms of description of the place, but also like level of residential density, building heights, at a high level, the types of land uses we would want to see there. Again, this isn't code, this isn't regulatory, this is policy guidance, but it is how the map is set up. And so for each one of the place types, there's like a one-page profile that describes kind of the desired attributes of that place type. And so I'm going to walk us through briefly kind of how that's set up so you can understand it a little bit more. So for like neighborhood center, for example, I know you can't read this, it's just for a visual. The first thing you look at is character. So there's a character kind of narrative description of that place. Second thing in there is transportation connectivity that generally describes the transportation network within these areas and kind of what that looks like. This one, land use and scale, I might spend a minute on because, again, not zoning, but it does, we felt it was important to set forth sort of an overall framework for the desired land uses in these places. So the way it's broken down is there's primary and supporting land uses. And so the way to, I think a good way to look at this is sort of like within the bubble on that map of that place type, what are the predominant land uses? What are most of the land uses going to be? And then the supporting land uses are the ones that are less so, sort of percent footprint wise, but maybe appropriate, in certain locations. So for example, in the single family kind of low density category, the idea of like, is a duplex okay in that area? That is an example of something in there that's like a supporting land use. So it might be okay, just not probably the predominant land use in that particular place type. It might be okay along certain corridors, things like that. And the density and scale is pretty self-explanatory. And the development considerations is just helpful sort of context and factors to consider as we're, I think, in particular evaluating development proposals that are within these place types. And last one to highlight the imagery that goes with each of the place types. These are intentionally sort of like found and calibrated to the density and height levels in the place type. So if you see an image within the place type, it should reflect, for example, somewhere in 18 to 30 dwelling units per acre. This project is that in that image. Same thing with the heights. The opportunity areas are also a sort of key component of that future land use framework and how the sort of future growth estimates are dialed. And these are sort of 4 areas along the periphery of the city where we think the most change is likely to occur. If we start getting into the analysis and the numbers, this is where about 90% of the future potential residential growth would occur. If you sort of run the analysis on that, we'll get into that. These areas were selected, and we talked about this a while back, you may remember, but these areas were selected for a number of reasons, one of which is there's a lot of vacant and underutilized land in these areas. Another big one is that they're already or will be supported by infrastructure to support new development. And then one other important thing to note is we asked a lot of questions with the engagement. One specific question that we asked was basically, how would you feel as a community about redeveloping these commercial areas? Would you support mixed use housing instead of just commercial? 80% said yes in that particular survey. That was a biannual resident survey. So getting into the future growth estimates that are tied to the future land use map. Some context really quick before we get into the numbers. Our population currently is about 20,000. This is laid out in the plan, but we've actually seen a population decline of in and around 9% over the last 5 years. sort of outside of Marshall Fire issues. Did want to note that we've been actively consulting with the school districts as we've been going through this planning process. They've been resoundingly clear that they support residential growth in Louisville and the policies in this plan as a result of that school enrollment decline. Before we get into the numbers again, just wanted to clarify. So the future growth estimates that are in the plan, not targets, they're not goals, they're not something that the plan is aspiring to. This is just really, not simply, but it is a foundation for us to kind of plan around and understand what could happen in the future if this builds out. So yeah, we can get into the methodology if you would like, but it's basically tied to the density ranges and the place types and what's possible in some of these areas. With a lot of different factors built in, but overall purpose is to understand as a city our utility needs, our infrastructure needs, and ensuring that we sort of have the systems in place to manage this change if it happens. We also wanted to, I guess, really clarify an important point in terms of this policy shift for us. Those of you that know the kind of the Louisville planning history know that we've been intentionally slow residential growth with really restrictive. So this is a change for us to allow residential in a lot of these places. The proposal and sort of the policy direction reflects like basically supporting the housing plan, right? The needs that are laid out in the housing plan, diversity of housing types, more housing affordability. That's obviously a huge part of this, but it's also very much about the economic vitality of our commercial areas. And so the plan is very deliberately set up to sort of maintain that footprint of existing commercial areas, our sales tax generating areas, so along McCaslin, along South Boulder Road and downtown. And we think, there's still a good footprint there, and the plan clearly articulates those are priority commercial only areas. And so it is important to know that a lot of the residential that's shown in that map is sort of peripheral to that and integrated with that, but not taking away for it. And in fact, we think heavily supporting it in terms of more customers, more people shopping nearby. Retail follows rooftops. You all may have heard that phrase. So very much a sort of a dual purpose, dual benefit approach is what's set forth in the plan. So getting into the numbers of what the analysis actually shows in terms of future growth estimates, again, not targets, not goals. Our current number of housing units is about 9,000. If this plan were to build out, our estimate is that it could lead to potentially 4,000 to 5,000 additional housing units. Again, this is over 20 years. And again, reminder, we're not proposing to change any of our sort of discretionary processes. All these projects will continue to come through a PUD. So we're not talking about by right things happening here. But over the span of 20 years, that's the range that our analysis came up with. And again, it's heavily concentrated in the opportunity areas. About 90% of it is. And about 75% of it is concentrated in the Centennial Valley and Red Tail Ridge areas. So it's heavily concentrated in those areas. Wanted to highlight and about finished here, the transportation policies in the plan. So there's a whole section on transportation with goals and strategies, but there is also specifically a future transportation connections map that essentially builds off of the 2019 Transportation Master Plan. That's still sort of our controlling, governing, transportation-specific policy document. So the comp plan aligns with it and builds off of it. It just really is about highlighting, like sort of dusting that off and showing what the key priority connections are from that plan and some additional information. And I wanted to circle back on the sort of this continuum trajectory idea and let folks know kind of what's planned or already underway to continue this process. Wherever it lands, these are kind of teed up to address that. So one big thing is the development code update. We've actually got an RFP that we're working on right now to at least start that process so that it can sort of quickly follow this. That's a really important implementation tool I'll touch on. We also have budgeted and starting to scope development impact fee updates. That's a huge, a really important issue to address, especially with any future residential growth, to make sure our fees are dialed to maintaining level of service in terms of parks, open space, trails, transportation network, cultural services, other things I think are on the table.
So
Yeah.
that's a consultant that you'll hire
Yes.
to evaluate that?
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Hasn't started yet, certainly, but yeah. And then the parks, you may all know that the Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Trails Master Plan is well underway now, and it's sequenced well with this plan to start to develop responsive strategies depending on where this plan lands in terms of future growth. We've been actively working with our utilities folks to ensure that we're tracking in terms of future estimates and things like that. So they are planning to update the utility system plan for the city really immediately after this plan is updated, and I think they've already started doing it to some degree. Development code update, just touch on it briefly. We can circle back to this, but it is currently scoped to be a really comprehensive update to Title 16 and 17 of our code and also all of our design standards and guidelines. So it's a really good window and opportunity to continue the plan, implement the comp plan. Key differences from the 2013 plan.
So that is going to take on CDDSG and IDDSG?
Yes, it's currently scoped to all 4 of them,
Right,
plus Title 16 and 17,
right.
parts of
Cool.
Title 15. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
So from the just highlighting quick changes from the 2013 plan, certainly dusting off and refreshing value statements and vision statements to reflect current community priorities. Things have changed, obviously, particularly around housing affordability, around resilience. Social equity is a more important topic now to be a lens for the plan. And then certainly we talked about the switch in how we view residential development. That's a really big one. The 2013 plan contemplated very little residential growth. This plan contemplates residential growth combined with some commercial growth. So the next steps, we actually go to council next Tuesday, which I know is quick, but we plan to immediately following this meeting document and relay your comments to council in advance of the meeting and then certainly share it at the meeting. And then we actually have a community informational open house scheduled on January 28th at the Simon Event Center on Main Street here. And then we have the Planning Commission adoption public hearing. So that'll be another chance to look at the next iteration of the draft, consideration for adoption. That's on February 26th. Council adoption planned for March 17th currently. So that concludes the presentation. These are the questions from the packet to kind of guide the discussion, but happy to answer any, whatever level of questions that you have.
Fantastic. Why don't we start with Commissioner Baskett?
Thank you. Could you say a little bit more about the analysis for the water supply?
Yeah, so are you, okay, yeah. So yeah, we've been actively working with our utilities folks that manage the water and wastewater system. And so they're well aware of the specific estimates and ranges in here. And so I guess our job at this point is to, in talking with them and kind of their perspective is, establish the vision, establish what we want to see, ensure that there's no major issues where we say, well, we can't accommodate that from a water supply perspective, for example, wastewater too. And so everything we've heard from them is that there's no major red flags. We're always sort of adapting our fee schedule and always monitoring that, and we'll continue to do that. As of now, no major concerns.
And then I would just add a couple things. So, when new development comes in, they pay a facilities expansion fee, basically, that pays for potential facilities expansion and water rights acquisitions needed to serve the development. So Public Works has a pretty robust plan that contemplates build-out, but they do get funds to pay for water rights acquisition. So I think, looking at the numbers in the plan, I don't want to say like we have everything we need, but there's a lot of capacity in the water system. And there is a process where they are always acquiring water and getting money to acquire water as new development comes in. It's not a static utility. It's designed to, grow as the city grows, and there's fee structures in place to do that.
Yeah.
Just so I'm probably betraying my lack of knowledge about the details about where the water comes from, but is it then, do they have a a clear source for acquiring that water, so kind of going forward? I
Right,
used
so
to
we-
do some water law, so I know that this is not a simple process necessarily, but do they have is there a company or a reservoir or some place where they know that they can, if need be, acquire water in the future?
Right, so we've recently bought into a new reservoir project that gets us pretty far into the future. So that's not to say that we wouldn't have to acquire additional water rights in the future. But we have multiple ways of getting water for the city right now, and they're, they have a systems plan that looks out to the future. And so I think once wherever the comp plan lands to, they're going to redo their projections. And then if there's a need for additional water rights, those might be 10, 15, 20 years out, is more likely than 5 years out based on what they already have, as I understand it. So they're also always looking for water when the price is right, as they've told me, right? Like, they're not waiting until they run out of water as well. So they're very proactive when it comes to purchasing water rights.
You know what reservoir project that is?
It's Chimney Hollow,
Okay.
I think is what it's called. Yep.
Just one comment around the whole topic of water that we started down. So, right, big themes in the plan really talk about future growth, future expansion. How do we develop? How do we support? How do we grow? And I appreciate your comments, Rob, about buying into the reservoir project, making sure we have capacity, working with Public Works and wastewater, right, on the logistical side of implementation. There really wasn't much, and this kind of goes to your last bullet point, of maybe some gaps or emissions. And I remember reading through a previous version of this, but we didn't really necessarily have a lot of emphasis on integrating efficiencies into the growth strategies, right? So like we talked a lot about, hey, we're going to get bigger, we're going to have more people, we're going to do these types of things, but there wasn't a whole lot of backup on that to say we can do those things better than we're doing them now, right? And so I'm just the topic about water just prompts me to remember that thought that I had about, maybe looking for that from the previous version and not necessarily seeing it here, about how we're also addressing the necessary growth, all of those types of things, but also saying, here's how we're going to incorporate some of those efficiency initiatives to support that growth. Does that make sense in terms of what I'm saying?
Can you explain what you mean by efficiency, so I'm sure I understand?
Right.
Like a housing unit right now, working with Public Works and wastewater, right? They are going to say, great, these many housing units, this many people in the city, this is the average consumption on the potable side.
You're talking about like water efficiency
Right,
and things like
right.
that.
And, this is how much wastewater gets generated from a specific housing unit. If we were just to take that and straight line it out and multiply it by the number of units, that's one projection, right? But we didn't necessarily say, here's how there's that straight line projection, but here's how we could
Yeah.
optimize it by also including elements in the plan about incentivizing additional efficiency.
Right. So I think there might be some broader policies about that, but we absolutely, so with the development code update, that's going to be a really big focus, very intentionally, of the development code update and the design guideline update. And one of the things we're contemplating is also having multifamily development standards, so that we do build in incentives. I think it's actually in the RFP that's drafted right now, that we're expecting the consultants to help us come up with an incentive-based design standard system for energy efficiency, water efficiency, and all of those types of things. It's going to be built into that follow-up.
So that's going to be part of the next subsequent efforts that we're
So,
going
yeah,
through
it's
and-
really implementation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we want to make sure in this, that we have those broad policy statements in this plan that are going to support the actual code update. And that's where the rubber will meet the road
Sure.
on how we're going to do that.
Do you think it's an opportunity to emphasize some of those policy statements in this policy focusing?
Instead of having it just address, we will purchase water, we will have efficiency programs in place to reduce existing consumption.
Yeah.
while
I
at
think
the same time.
and
Yeah,
that-
if that's
and
not
that-
a strategy right now, we'll want to make sure it's in there.
It does, it does or should, those types of things live in there. But I think to your point, we could draw a clearer line and
Sure.
distinction of what that means for,
Yeah, and in rereading through this version of the draft, and I probably didn't necessarily put in the same level of scrutiny as I did on the previous draft that we had, but it wasn't something that stood out and, slapped me in the face, which might be nice.
it's a good comment, yeah.
Yeah, no, I would like to see that elevated. Commissioner Mahaley.
Yeah, along those lines, and I think this might fall under future work, because I certainly don't know the full extent of what's planned for the future. It's, it references future utility master plan updates. In addition to comments that have been made about water, I think those of us who live in Ward 2 and elsewhere who have dealt with, frequent power outages in the last few weeks, I see, one of the factors that we're going to need to manage is the expansion of the grid and making sure that is resilient. I mean, sure, things are getting more efficient, but as our codes also are increasingly more demanding on electric services, I'm not sure how much of that is supposed to fall into this comp plan, right? But whoever's holding that card, we at least need to be accounting for it somehow and how we're planning and doing policy. So I'm mentioning this really just because I don't know what's in the scope of the planned future updates to the utility master plan. So I'm also partly asking how much of that should we be considering for the comp plan? Because that certainly is a factor in managing growth.
So from an electric utility standpoint, obviously, that's not the city. So we're really focusing on water and sewer as far as the utilities that we provide. So I think if we wanted to, we could have policies about working with Excel to have more infrastructure resiliency, but we're not, in a position to build that out, if that makes sense.
And that's what I'm getting at. And I guess in answering the question of what's an emission, I think we should be the things that we can do, I think we should be doing on that front.
Right. So that could be a good strategy to add. And I just would add, just to get back on the other topic too, like within the environmental sustainability, we have a goal on promoting energy efficiency and renewable energy in buildings and promoting water conservation and efficiency. So those, those are in the plan right now. So if you want what might be helpful is if you see something missing, or you think it needs to be addressed slightly differently, a little more specificity might be helpful, because I'm hearing you want water efficiency, but it's also already in the plan.
And I mentioned electric, it's sort of in the in-between, because, we have some effect, but it's not, we don't control it all, the entire thing, but we certainly need to manage it and account for it as we're expanding.
Right.
So it's sort of, my concern is that it falls through the cracks because it's not a Louisville service.
Well, and right, because we do have programs in place that will provide people with rebates to encourage certain behaviors for energy and water efficiency. And so we do have a little bit of leverage there. And I think the goal is, right, so that it doesn't appear to be development as usual, right? And we don't just buy our way out of water needs.
Or we push it and we allow it to go in a direction that's so far beyond what Excel could account for. Yeah.
Yeah, Excel and utility and grid are
That's what
like
I'm getting at, yeah.
a whole ball of wax. Yeah. Any other thoughts on water in particular?
No, I have something else I wanted to.
Water? No?
Utilities.
Utility, juicy, yes. Should we start down there? Jennifer?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to stick with utilities, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the future land use framework and understand a little better what is intended to be the relationship between these place types, which are really in some ways very different from our current zoning areas, and like what the relationship between these place types and our zone districts is intended to be,
Yep.
and how much this has to be addressed with that amendment.
Yeah, it's the sequence is ideal to do the code right after the plan, so you can sort of tee that up, and that's the purpose in part for the place types. So the purpose is kind of put simply to act as the foundation for a revised lineup of zone districts. So and we don't know what that looks like yet. We're still scoping that, obviously, but yeah. So you take one place type, the residential low density place type, for example. The idea is you have enough of a framework there in terms of allowed uses at a high level, densities, heights, development considerations. You can craft a specific zone district to fit within that range. So there'll be like a low range of that. The lowest density within that range will be residential lowest, whatever we call it, R1 or something. And so then you're able to calibrate all the uses allowed the development standards, building height setbacks, things like that, using this as a foundation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. What I was trying to get at is that, or noticing, I guess, in this is there's like, we have some really new concepts like this flex or mixed employment. And just trying to figure out how, if later we're trying to use this to craft new zone districts, sort of how that will relate.
I think it's good to keep in mind, like, as you're looking at it through that lens, to recognize that that is one of its outcomes. And so is this a good, it's like an example of a clarifying thing. Are there clarifications needed to where, like, it's important to clarify that now so that it's clear when we go to write the code?
Right, and I would think what we're anticipating is there's the opportunity areas, and those really have different concepts that we don't have in our zoning structure right now. And so that's absolutely going to be part of the development code update. I think outside of those areas of stability, we may or may not need to change the zoning in those areas. It may be supported. We may want to, just for simplicity and ease of use, but generally maintain the same standards. So I think that's the direction that we would be headed.
That makes sense. And I think one of the things I like are identifying these opportunity areas. And it does give us the opportunity as a community to think about different ways to do zoning, ways that we haven't done before, which is really hard to do with existing neighborhoods because we don't want to disrupt existing neighborhoods. So I think I like that aspect of it.
Great. Utilities, should we go there? Yes.
I want to go back to Excel again for a minute, and I understand it's not, the city probably just fights with Excel all the time to get things done when they're supposed to be done. The city receives undergrounding funds, which are never enough to do as much as we'd like to see. But I think if there's not a policy statement in there about utility, about collaborating with Excel, that there needs to be something explicit in there.
We could definitely find a home for that.
Yeah, completely agree, and especially as it pertains to growth and capacity.
Do we actually know when the Excel franchise agreement is next up for discussion? Does it
I
come
don't know.
Not necessarily. Okay, cool. All right. Any additional utility, water, placemaking, place saving? Questions, thoughts?
Thanks.
We go ahead and open it up. I'd love to get some of the public comments now. Why don't we open it up for public comment? As we move into that, though, recognizing we do have an addendum 1 to our agenda this evening, and thanking you guys for sending in your email comments. Appreciate it.
First up, I have Andy Johnson.
And on deck,
Cindy Bedell will be on deck.
great. And then our online participant who is identified as Mike, if you want to raise your hand, if you want to speak, let us know, please. All right. Not really. I mean, well, why don't we try to stay away from standard timing, and if you can keep it, concise, that's always appreciated. If we get to 4 or 5 minutes, I might interrupt you. Do you want more than that? Is it easy to set up for different amounts of time? Like, ooh. Why don't we run it at 6 so at least people who are talking can know how long they've been.
Okay, first of all, never give an architect more than 3 minutes.
Welcome, Mr. Johnson. It's good to have
Thank
you
you.
here.
Good evening. My name's Andy Johnson. I'm a Louisville resident, also a business owner in Louisville. Some of my comments may not be as relevant, given that there are a lot of future discussions to be had after the comp plan is approved. However, some of them may apply. I want to begin by thanking staff for the monumental effort reflected in this draft. This update is clear and a significant improvement over our previous two comp plans, both of which I did participate in. The depth of research is evident and it represents a major step forward for Louisville. So thank you. While I have way more to reflect on than 3 minutes allows, and I was anticipating that, I am speaking tonight as a proponent of Strong Towns principles, which emphasizes long-term fiscal resilience and incremental growth. My goal is to offer some collaborative refinements that I believe will help the city achieve its housing and vibrancy goals. While the plan correctly identifies key areas for large-scale development, I believe we can bolster our success by also focusing on existing residential fabric. Roughly 60% of our town consists of single-family neighborhoods, which represents about 5,800 homes in the low-density place type area. We can allow these areas to evolve gently by creating an easy by right path for duplex conversions of all residential districts. This type of incremental change provides a more affordable entry point into Louisville than a new detached home or attached single-family home. It also does so with almost no impact on the physical scale of a neighborhood. Regarding our downtown, I believe it is time for a fresh approach. Our downtown design handbook is nearly 30 years old and frankly has become tired. While combined with our onerous parking requirements, the handbook is arguably hindered more than it has helped. In recent years, it has seen stalled or failed projects more than successes, even those with strong community support. In many cases, the only way a project has been able to move forward is by seeking significant relief from these guidelines. We have the opportunity now to modernize these standards and invite authentic, high-quality architecture that is actually feasible to build. I encourage to change language in the comp plan around downtown from preserve to enhance. Lastly, I'm looking for more clarity on how the Old Town overlay will interact with the new proposed residential place type. Much of downtown is designated as residential low density on the future land use map. I would love to see the plan explicitly define how we can protect the unique spirit of Old Town while ensuring that it isn't restricted from the small scale flexibility that has historically made it our most vibrant neighborhood. Thank you again for this professional and comprehensive body of work. I look forward to working together to make our neighborhoods even more resilient and accessible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Bedell.
And then after that, Tamar Krautz.
Oh, hi, can you hear me okay? Yeah. So when I read this plan, quite honestly, I was shocked with the amount of population increase suggested. So this plan proposes the addition of 4,000 to 5,000 housing units, which actually may be a low estimate if you look at some of the calculations. So in a town of 8,929 current housing units, if each household averages 2.29 people as set out in the plan, the city would grow from 19,889 to between 29,049 and 31,339 people. And that's within our 8 square miles. So what would the impact be of adding 9,000 to 11,000 more people to this town as far as infrastructure, crowding, parks and rec, open space? Like, people are already kind of fighting over swim lanes at the rec center, for example, and the degradation of our open space with that much use. And then I also wanted to mention, if you look at some of the past possible calculations for water needs. I'm looking at a presentation we had from our from our development director in September of 2024. So So at that point, I think there was some consideration of a 2047 projected population of 24,000 as far as the ability to purchase water. But now we're looking at 29,000 to 31,000 people. So I think that the water is a really good question. How will we have enough water to support that much growth? And finally, if I have a few more minutes, I think we should really focus on trying to maintain our naturally occurring, more affordable housing stock. So an acquaintance of mine counted something like 85 scrape-offs around Louisville, and I'm sure that's just a small estimate. And a lot of these scrape-offs were smaller, more affordable housing units, and they were replaced by housing units that were much more expensive. So it's just kind of difficult for me to understand why we're scraping off more affordable units, replacing them with units that are over $1 million, $1.5 million, say the East Street developments, for example. And yet we're talking about we need more housing because we need more affordable housing. So those two things just don't match for me. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And then after this, Catherine Smith.
Hi, my name is Tamar Krantz. Hi, Commissioner Ritchie. Nice to see you joining the board. Thank you for volunteering and everybody who came back. I really like that the new plan has an emphasis on sustainability and affordability. And there's a lot of things that I really like, but I don't like the growth and I don't have a lot of time to talk. So I just kind of wanted to address that issue. I read Appendix B that explains the growth methodology. And I understand that 4,000 to 5,000 is what you're considering to be a realistic, but you mentioned that it wasn't use by right. But if you look at what's use by right, I'm concerned that it's nearly double that, because most of our, if I'm understanding the calculations correctly, if you're assuming the appendix that explains the methodology, first you're assuming the midpoint is what's going to be achieved. And then you're assuming, based on that midpoint, you're assuming only 10 to 80% of that's going to be achieved. From what we've seen from recent developments, we've seen requests for over 100% of the use by right. So I don't know how these assumptions came about, but on the last draft, I sat there. I don't have access to the sophisticated GIS that the staff does, but I actually sat there and looked at all the parcels on the map and added up the acreage, estimated where all the lines were. And this is on the last draft, because the last draft was really nice. The last draft showed you that really great map that came along with it that showed each opportunity area broken down by place types. And that was really useful. And based on that, I calculated that the maximum, the use by right, would be 733 units at Avista, 3,863 units at Red Tail Ridge, and 3,347 units at in the Centennial Valley area, McCaslin Corridor, just in that Centennial Valley part. But if I didn't, took me so long to do it, I didn't calculate South Boulder Road or downtown areas. So we're already looking at 10,000 houses that are used by right from the last comprehensive plan. I don't know how things have changed. I noticed that you changed. I really applaud you for changing the flex growth type to the mixed use growth type. I think that was a really great change. But I would love it if you would ask the question. Could you ask the planning staff, I would love to see it myself. Show us this really cool database and how you guys can calculate this stuff, because I think it might be worth you and City Council having the opportunity to play with a little bit and look at what the maximums are and what the minimums are and what the assumptions are. So I know that this Jeff was explaining to me that this database is kind of complicated, but I'm sure it's user-friendly enough for them to show you how it works, and maybe you could ask questions about the minimum and the maximum so we could really see the range. I guess I'm kind of running out of time, but I think that's too much growth. I think that the housing plan said 2,000 some hundred. I mean, stick to what was in the housing plan. This is way over what was in the housing plan, and I think that we need to ask what people really want at the next open house, because I don't think everybody really wants this much growth. It didn't come up that way in the last community engagement thing when you guys got the scenarios. I put that in my email to you. regarding the development considerations, I love the questions that you guys were all asking so far. And I would love to see in the strategies for sustainability, for water efficiency and stuff like that, that you give direction in the strategy, say up, and rather than say increase water efficiency or strive for water efficiency, say change the CDSG and the IDSG and all the development code to actually include all those things. I think that would be great. And finally, I just had one off-topic thing about the school board thing. I understand that our schools are under-enrolled, but I was speaking to a couple of the school board candidates, and they didn't say that their number one priority was population growth to fix the school board issue, the enrollment issues. There's a lot of other ways to deal with, nobody wants neighborhood schools to close, but it's a more complicated issue than just adding more housing units. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Smith, and then Matt Jones after that.
And then we'll jump on to the online person after that.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Catherine Smith. I live in Ward 3. And I am like the other commenters. I'm concerned about the level of growth. And I feel that some growth is important, some growth is necessary. But I'm looking for something that is really measured growth and thoughtful growth. And the question that comes to my mind that I just don't know the answer to from reading the comprehensive plan is how does Louisville benefit? What good comes to our city from this level of growth? And that's a question I would like to see answered. I would like the Planning Commission and the City Council to make the case for this level of growth and to explain to us why this is appropriate. I make this comment because I love living in Louisville. I think it's a great community. I think that we have done a lot of things right over time. I think going through this process and asking good questions, community dialogue is healthy, and I'd like to see that continue, particularly around the growth issue. I am concerned about the impacts on my daily life. I'm concerned about traffic, which I think is already troublesome in places in Louisville. And if we add all of this housing, have all of these people, all of the new cars, I just don't know how we don't reduce our quality of life. I also feel like the plan does look at resiliency issues, does look at wildfire issues and other kinds of natural disasters. But an aspect of that that I didn't find in the plan is evacuation routes. And how are we going to get all of these people? We've been through one evacuation where people talk about the length of time that it took them to get out of Louisville. And I think that's an important thing. And I also have in many city forums had residents of Louisville express a lot of concern and frustration about the fire. From a fiscal standpoint, it is my understanding that housing by itself doesn't pay its own way, which means that we have to have a thriving business community in order for our city to continue to be successful. And I'm concerned that I'm not seeing that aspect, that there has to be a balancing between the residential growth and the commercial activity. And I'm just not seeing that here, how we're gonna do that. I would like to see the city, I would like to see more affordable housing. I know the city spends a lot of time and energy working on that issue, but the reality is in terms of getting actual housing units, we've only been able to deliver a much smaller number of units, a much smaller number of units than we need. And if we only have a community where very wealthy people live in our community, I think the richness of our community will be diminished. With regard to the PROS plans and the Trails Master plans, I just would like to say, emphasize, it's in my letters, but the city already has a very robust process underway to deal with the trails plans and the management of our open space. And to the extent that you start delving into the details, you start going in directions that are not consistent with what is going on in the other departments in the city and in the other, with projects with other consultants. And so in particular, I ask that you remove the Goodhue Ditch Trail Connector from the comprehensive plan and use other city processes. There's no reason why you can't participate in the consultant's process. Thank you for the additional time and for your service.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks for doing this and having this hearing. My name is Matt Jones. I live in Louisville in Mighty Ward 3. I want to first thank staff for all the work they've done. If you look at this document, it's been a ton of work, right? And I appreciate all the time and effort and a lot of competing voices and trying to integrate all that and make it work, so thank you. I have 3 requests. And I'll start with the table 1, which we've been talking about with the growth and how much and units of growth and that kind of thing. And if you look at that table and add up the columns, they don't add up to the total at the bottom. The total says 4,000 to 5,000 units. But if you add the total in those columns, it's 4,100 to 5,900 units. So that would be a 46 to 67% increase. That's huge. I don't think people in town have any idea this is going on. I really don't. I think some do that keep track of planning stuff, but that's an unusual group of people. So what I would ask, my first request, is let people know that you're planning, the city's planning in the comprehensive plan to increase growth 50 to 60%. Because that's what this document does. And you don't want to have people coming up later, I had no idea, because, you tell people to plan, to comment on a planning document, they go, oh boy, But if you tell them that that's what's going to happen to them, they'll show up and be part of this thing. And you don't want to do that after the fact. You want to do it now. Secondly, because of that, I think you should do a financial analysis, a marginal cost approach analysis, to find out what that does, all that residential growth does to the city coffers. Residential does not pay its way. You probably know all this. Commercial and industrial subsidizes it. If you add a ton of residential, you undermine your finances in the city. That will run the city into either cutting services for residents or asking for a property tax or a sales tax increase. We want to avoid that. You need to make this decision wide, wide open, and the council does too. You need that analysis before you make a decision. I think you'll find that you don't want to do that. They did that, I understand, in the last comp plan, and the top end of the people who were really go-go development was 26,000 people. So you need to know that ahead of time and not later. And thirdly, I would ask you, that's my third request, is to reduce that number substantially of growth. You can accomplish the housing plan goals within a smaller number, especially when you consider most of these new units, if you add them, are going to be market rate units, unaffordable. And so you can do the affordability in a smaller scale and not have all this extra growth. I was at a Ward 3 meeting last night with the council members, and a nice meeting. People were talking about traffic and quality of life and how things are going the way they want them to, and how their concerns about that, they need to know that this plan is going to increase the number of people in town, residents, 50 to 60%. So they got to know about it. You need to do a financial analysis. It's the only prudent approach to doing this. And third, please drop that number. We have such a unique quality of life in Louisville, and we really, really risk it by doing that kind of increase. And I'm particularly concerned about downtown and all the plans to change buildings, tear down buildings. That's our golden goose. That's what makes us unique. And that's what, when you talk to people around the state, they'll say, oh, I know Louisville. Yeah, it's a nice downtown. I'm really concerned with this growth here. What were the numbers? Where is it? 200 to 300 more units in the downtown area. And I know that area extends down far beyond just Old Town, but still, that is just huge. So please back off. Please let people know what's going on, and please do a financial analysis. And thanks for your time.
Thank you. And online, we have a mic. If you can identify yourself and city of residence.
Hello, Mike Kransdorf. I'm not a Louisville resident, but I'm a downtown business and property owner. I want to applaud both the implicit and explicit recognition that all communities need to contribute to housing availability. I live in a single-family neighborhood in Boulder, and frankly, I'm saddened by how many of my neighbors don't want any change, don't want any duplexes, don't want anything else. I welcome it. I'll also say it's essential to remember this is a 20-year plan. It doesn't require this growth, it just allows it. So I applaud the work of staff, and I back this move. Thanks.
Thank you. So moving back to commission, any thoughts, questions of staff, reactions, concerns? Yes, Ms. Commissioner Ritchie.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Choi. I'm going to start maybe in a few directions. If we want to pause on some of them, that's fine. But overall, I just want to say, really appreciate all the hard work that has gone into this. And I say, overall, I think it gets a lot right. From a big picture perspective, I just want to kind of say on the record that I'm comfortable with the amount of residential development in the plan because it's entirely infill and it doesn't rely on new annexations, right? And I think from like an infrastructure and fiscal responsibility, it's smarter to do infill development than be looking at expanding our borders and adding a lot of new lane miles and things like that. So I'm comfortable with the number. I do think, though, might be helpful from a policy perspective to draw a stronger connection between the fact that we've added, what I can't remember the number, 7,000 new jobs since 2010, and just such a small fractional amount of housing. So when we think about the impact on our community, a lot of those people are already here, right? They're driving. We've added 7,000 jobs in our community in the last 15 years, right? So they're coming from somewhere. So we should give them the opportunity to live here, be integrated in our community. And I think the traffic impact might not be as severe as folks are concerned about. I would like to see, I appreciate the naturally occurring affordable housing discussion. I think I'd like to see a little bit more fleshing out of maybe why those areas were selected, kind of what might qualify other areas to be considered for that in the development code rewrite. I think I'm going to just do you want me to just keep going? Okay.
Yeah. And if any of the other commissioners
Yeah.
want to jump on any topics as they come up, please.
I spent, I think, most of my time during the review in the place types discussion. I viewed that as kind of, from my perspective, that is kind of forms the basis of our new development code, right? So I think the policies and guidance in those place types becomes kind of the basis of our zoning. And I appreciate the comments that we heard tonight about residential development. And I appreciate them kind of on both sides of the spectrum here. I would be comfortable with more explicit allowance for duplexes in our existing neighborhoods. I live in a neighborhood with duplexes and single-family homes side by side, and it's perfectly wonderful neighborhood to live in here in Louisville. I also I share the same concerns I think that, Mr. Johnson raised around Old Town. It doesn't really factor in, I think, some of the character differences by lumping Old Town in with the residential low. I think there's some distinct differences there, particularly I think you described in the development considerations, RLD is suburban low-density development. And I think there's I don't know that suburban is the right use of the term there. In any of the residential development discussions, I would also, I think, appreciate a note acknowledging that dwelling units per acre is not kind of a one-size-fits-all number. A one-bedroom apartment is vastly different than a large lot single-family home. And so maybe some sort of caveat in there that, and I think you acknowledge this, but just I'd be curious to know more about how those numbers might be evaluated in the future. Is that neighborhood-wide? Is that development-specific?
Well, do we want to discuss that and ask that right now? You guys are welcome also.
The question is specifically how would the density ranges be applied?
Yeah, do you guys view that as like is that a hard cap? Is that just like an estimate? Is that neighborhood-wide or site-specific wide or?
We definitely intended it to be pretty flexible, honestly, to where if a project wanted to go lower than that range, that would be fine. It's when you get into the upper limits of the range and even talking about requests for going above, I think the intent of the plan, and maybe it could be clear, is the higher up that you might go on that range, the more sort of community benefit we would want to see in exchange for that kind of thing. I think that's probably not clearly articulated in the plan. That's sort of the intent.
So examples of community benefit at that point?
What's that?
Examples of community benefit?
On-site affordable housing, additional public land dedication. It could be some sort of energy efficiency metric, water conservation. There are any number of things, I think. And that's a code level thing in terms of calibrating the incentives and getting all those metrics specific. But to your question also, that's also the code is defining the zone districts that live with it. So there'll be one zone district that represents the very low end of that place type range, right? And so it'll be tighter. And so I think the code is the place to flesh it out. But the overall intent of the plan is for it to be not too rigid, but just give you the lanes, right? Yeah.
And I would just add, we've had some discussion, sorry.
I just want to say, this is why the place types are not real neat overlays onto what potential zone districts might be. They're just broad swath guidelines, and we could have, gradations within those when we get to the ultimate development code.
And I think when you get into the higher density housing, there's a lot more questions because you could have 3-bedroom apartments versus efficiencies in 1-bedroom apartments, and it's the same physical form of the building, but it's a vastly different number of units. So I think we did try to account for that somewhat by the range, but when we get into the development code update, we don't want this to be prescriptive, and if we do want to do more of a form-based code, we want to leave the door open for that. We've actually had that question from some city council members, but we're, part of it too is we hope this is close enough to representing what we want, and we can deal with that more specifically in the development code, because it's a pretty big lift to turn this into kind of a form-based comprehensive plan. We want to just generally describe the character, because people understand that a little bit more about dwellings per acre.
Happy to keep going a little bit. I have a few more thoughts too on the place types.
So some of the topics you mentioned previously, did you want to ask questions directly of staff?
Let me go back, I think. I don't know that they were questions necessarily. Oh, I did have a question. I don't know if you want to talk about the naturally occurring affordable housing a little bit more before I move on. I did have, I guess, kind of your thoughts on how that advances forward.
Yeah, also intended to be flexible, but I think, when you look at the map that we could pull up where there's I think it's called an overlay area. That's the area where it's just known that it's the highest concentration of apartments, and naturally occurring means, right? I mean, I know you know what it means, but it's they're not subsidized, but the rates are a little bit lower due to the age of the structure or whatever it is. The concentration area is generally defined on the plan, but the intent is to leave enough wiggle room in there to where if there are other pockets in the city that have that amenity, that should be a priority to preserve that to the extent possible.
Great.
Okay.
One question I have for staff, I think, as I was reading through, there was a kind of a caveat that you used quite a bit. And I understand kind of the rationale why, but I'm curious as you read it, what that means to you. And I think a lot of times you use the phrase like, where compatible with neighborhood context, right? So some of these land uses might be appropriate, where compatible or as, appropriate. And I'm just wondering in your mind, does that mean in like a lot of places, a little places? Are you going to flesh that out a little bit more? Like what does that kind of caveat, do you have an idea of what that caveat means yet?
I mean, it's definitely a code level of like, and intentionally at that level so that the code is the place to figure out what that means. But I would say like, if you look at this plan and like look at it on its whole, neighborhood compatibility with neighborhood context could mean a number of things. I think one priority is when you look at the opportunity areas and the edges of them adjacent to the existing established neighborhoods, there are policies in there that support reduced building heights, having the density sort of more closely aligned with what it's abutting. That's a huge example. And I think that you could probably extrapolate from the plan related to like architecture and sort of built environment kind of things, but probably be clear. But it is intentionally, as you acknowledged, kind of at the, admittedly vague level, but gives us space to define what that means.
I think a primary example of that could be, transitioning near a single-family neighborhood, right? Like maybe if you're designing a new neighborhood and it's going to be a mix of row homes and multifamily homes, maybe you don't want to put the multifamily homes right next to the single-family homes. Maybe you want to transition the density.
Okay.
So I think that's an example of what we mean by that as well.
I assumed, I just think that was helpful to clarify. A few things I just want to say, I really appreciate the increased detail and the recovery and resiliency from the previous version of the plan. I think you guys have done a really nice job expanding that discussion. And I just have a few more if we want. I appreciate, I think the comment about, limiting scrapes of existing residential development. And I think to some degree our existing code kind of incentivizes new large homes. And so I'd like to see more language in here that I think maybe we're okay with smaller lots, right? In addition to smaller units, like we're okay with maybe a smaller lot size character in some of our existing, in our residential neighborhoods. And then.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that too.
Yeah.
Right, obviously it's a market that's driving scrapes and multi-million-dollar homes. How do you view that?
Yeah, so, and I know Commissioner Ritchie was actually familiar with Old Town specifically. So traditional lot sizes are much smaller than the zoning allows. And, a few years ago, we were looking at potentially changing minimum lot sizes. I think, one of the issues was at that time, we weren't sure if that would be supported. Right now, I think based on what our city council has been giving us direction on, I think that is something we should consider for when we do our code update starting next year. Do we want to transition more to traditional size lots in Old Town, allowing smaller lots? Because smaller lots, you're going to have smaller homes as well. You're going to have opportunities for smaller homes, which also might be more affordable, but also preserve character of Old Town a little better, even if you're not landmarking and preserving the home. But the new homes arguably could be in a better match to existing character.
Okay.
All right. Switching over to, I think, some more of our commercial downtown. I appreciate the comment regarding maybe a little more flexibility and openness for change in our downtown area. I think there's some language in there kind of honor the existing development standards and honor existing code. I think we should loosen that up a little bit. And I did notice that you put on your slide, that an update to the downtown design guidelines is planned. So I think maybe you're planning for maybe more flexibility than how the draft of the comp plan is maybe indicating. And then just finally, I think in the commercial areas, maybe some more explicit language around, I know our current code requires, large landscaped areas on some of our commercial development. And the practical effect of that, I think, is spreading out our buildings and kind of driving sprawl a little bit more. I think as we think about rewriting our commercial design standards, I would want to have more language around like shared parking, less green landscaping, still certainly attractive landscaping, but not, just large swaths of landscaping be required as they are today. I think that's kind of what I've got so far.
That's a whole bunch of things, all right.
Okay.
Thank you very
You told me
much.
to come with stuff, so here we go.
Great to hear. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Additional question, yes. Yeah,
New topic.
all right, great.
I had to go down the transportation path a little bit.
Good for you.
So I think that there is a goal missing in the trail system discussion on page 44, goal CP4. My concern is about management of the trail system, management of the users of the trail system. So we've just passed a speed limit for the trail system, which is awesome. Now, I think we need a goal that says we're going to manage the trail system so it's accessible and safe for all users. So I would suggest that additional goal.
What does that mean?
Well, I think it needs education programs. I think it needs more regulations, unfortunately. I perceive that we're at a tipping point where the e-bikes are not compatible with pedestrians and the way the trail system is used. I believe it can be managed and be a shared path, but I'd like to see some language in there that's a little stronger. What's your concern?
I think, Jeff emphasized a number of times that this is a policy-based document. And when we start talking about the idea of having something that has an element of enforceability to it, it veers away from being policy-driven and becomes more regulatory, right? And I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that right now, the way things are trending, moves towards incompatibility. I just wonder, is this the right place for that? Because it is a policy-driven thing, but you're talking about a regulatory solution.
I am talking about a policy that says manage the trail system so it's accessible and safe for all users. I think that is at the policy level rather than at the regulatory level. The question was, how do you do that? You do it by regulation, enforcement, education.
And this just
I'm
prompts.
not looking for
at
that
this
in the
level, it
comp plan.
prompts that
Correct.
further discussion.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's got to be in the Parks Recreation Plan, I think, is where that lives, but in the interest of linking the two. So the other thing that stood out to me, and it's maybe because I'm not in the room anymore, there's under the transit improvements discussion around Northwest Rail, there is number 6 says planning for a Northwest Rail system for a Northwest Rail station outside of downtown near the Colorado Tech Center. Could you give me some context for that?
Yeah, that there was some discussion about that in our transportation master plan. I think that's why it got pulled in. There was at one point talk about a potential, that's clearly not in any current plans for, passenger rail that's currently being planned pretty actively right now, but there was a desire, since it's so near an employment center at some point, that if there was an opportunity, that might make sense for a stop. So I would say that's not something we heard a lot of community input on. It's just something that's getting carried forward from our transportation plan.
Well, it's never been discussed. That's why there's no community input on it, right?
I'm honestly trying to find it in the plan where.
Page 293, I think it is.
Yeah. I'm not familiar that.
So we can give you a moment.
We'll see if
Actually,
we'll see if it's in the plan, or I don't know if it was a reference to the
I'd like to
transportation
take
master plan.
5 minutes. That'll give you guys a chance to pull that up. I'm also interested in discussing fiscal after we come back from a break.
Sure.
And then also for public who are here, if you all want to, if you have additional thoughts you wanted to share after our break, you're welcome up again. Thanks. 5 minutes,
Recording stopped.
7:55, 6 minutes. Can we,
It's like, I think
Cullen's
that's
out
good.
still?
Like, that'll be motivating. for
Cullen,
you.
okay.
She still has a lot of work, and that was our audiology. I met with her yesterday.
Thank you. If we can reconvene now, please. In the audience. Thank you. All right, so we were diving into a subject right there before, we broke. So regarding this potential for possible train stop in the tech center, that was attributed to what document now?
It's in one of the background, there's the transportation assessment, which was
Okay.
a appendix document. And I think, yeah. And I think it is, I think it was discussed in our transportation plan as well, as further background. But it is not in the comprehensive plan draft. It only discusses front range passenger rail that is being planned with potential stop in Louisville by 2029 at South Street in Delo.
Yeah, okay. Great, thanks. And then as far as fiscal analysis, at what point do we look at that? I mean, obviously, it's not on the individual property level.
Yeah, so, fiscal impact analysis, it's a very specific tool for land use planning. We didn't do a specific fiscal analysis for this comprehensive plan. We've done that a lot in the past. Over the years, we've done different levels of fiscal impact analysis. There is this concept called fiscal zoning, which I think the city has been doing for a while. It's actually where you have undesirable, it's an undesirable condition actually to have fiscal zoning, because if you just look at commercial development, of course it looks very strong to the city coffers, but that if it's not market supported, it could actually backfire. And I think that's what we've seen as a city over the years, especially when you look in the McCaslin Corridor and Centennial Valley. We've been fiscally zoning that. It's broad commercial zoning over a very large area that is not commercially supported, and it's struggled. The businesses have struggled. We've had a lot of big vacancies. And the idea of economic vitality and economic development is a little more complex than just doing the fiscal analysis. You have to do placemaking. You have to bring in rooftops. You have to create places where people want to be. So part of the residential development strategy is economic vitality with this comprehensive plan. It is to bring in more interesting, vital areas to support existing businesses. But when we look at residential development, that will drive additional commercial development. That doesn't, if you do a fiscal model or a fiscal impact analysis, that doesn't necessarily get captured. I would also say that, a comprehensive plan land use map is not zoning. It's intended to evolve over time, and a fiscal analysis is one moment in time. And, it's very different as if the city were to do an annexation, for example, of a new area. You actually have to zone that area. It makes a lot of sense to do a fiscal analysis and a market analysis at that time to make sure that you are having fiscal balance with large new annexed areas. But infill development's much more complex. The comprehensive land use map is just kind of a future vision for 20 years. It's going to go through lots of iterations. So I was even going back and looking at our fiscal impact consultant's notes from 2013, and he does not recommend doing fiscal impact analysis citywide for a comprehensive plan map for those reasons. I know I'm not explaining it incredibly well here, but I just think it's really important to understand that if we drive all of our future land uses by a fiscal analysis, it may not be market supported, and it may not actually result in good commercial growth and economic vitality for the city. It's much more complex than that.
Great, thank you.
And so is the idea then that I think we have to get back to what the purpose of this document is, and it is to provide a framework on which we can hang future iterative decisions, right, as we go about how the development that could happen, whether it does happen, and how it happens, and whether it makes financial sense.
Yeah. And I would just add, having broad commercial zoning that does look really good in a fiscal model also doesn't necessarily support affordable housing. When you put market rate and affordable housing in the fiscal model, it doesn't show very well. But it doesn't mean the city doesn't have to be smart and make sure that we grow responsibly and have an appropriate tax base. But the idea is that this type of development will make areas more economically vital and attract new businesses and support existing businesses in a way that we haven't done over the last couple decades.
Great, thanks. I think if the commission feels okay, maybe we can invite the public again to, if you all wanted to chime in on anything you're welcome to, but we did hear you out the first time, but sure. Mr. Johnson?
So Andy Johnson, again. I completely agree with what Director Zuccaro is saying. I think that a financial analysis is purely a snapshot in time. It does not anticipate a whole lot more than that. I am curious, and I don't know if this could be a discussion. When you look at the future land use map, it's very segregated. It has colors everywhere. I'm wondering, given that there is such a gradient to the place types, that in some cases there is a little bit of overlap. I'm wondering, do those colors combine? Do they really need to be that segregated and unmixed? Or do we really have opportunity to create more diverse neighborhoods as opposed to further segregated neighborhoods? To me, a comp plan is not necessarily about how we set up our zoning districts. It's about how we create our neighborhoods. And I think the diversity that we can create within a neighborhood is critical. It's why we love downtown. It grew over time. It was incremental. And it had a lot of diversity. We've lost a lot of that, which we could gain back through aspirational goals within our comp plan, within our language of the downtown design handbook and framework plan and all these guiding documents that create a lot of order, maybe not a lot of intelligence, but a lot of order. But I think we can add more intelligence to our discussion about how do we create our neighborhoods and the real meaningful placemaking that this comp plan does. We can get very lost in talking about utilities, resilience, all these very important things, but in the end, we want to love living here, and quality of life isn't diminished by the fear of what growth may or may not bring. It doesn't, it's not a color coding map. And so I'm wondering, how do we shake the snow globe and let these colors mix? Anyway, something to think about, food for thought.
I'm curious, do you envision something that's more form-ish based code, or is that too early to ask that unfair question of me? Or?
I think it's too early. I would say that even though there's lots of different colors and there's lots of lines and they don't overlap, we do intend that within a certain area that there should be flexibility. It's just a general mix of uses is how we want to describe it, and maybe we need to be more clear about that. I think what's different too with this comprehensive plan compared to last is our residential mixed use, our neighborhood center, our regional center, our flex district. Those are all intended to allow mixed use and not prescribe segregated uses, which I think is not exactly what Mr. Johnson's saying, but it's a similar concept. So we are trying to move a little bit in that direction with this.
Great, thanks.
If I might, it sounds more like those colors kind of represent like development intensity, maybe not segregation of uses. Is that kind of what you're trying to say? Like the regional center is probably like your highest intensity of amount of development?
I think the importance of use depends on the area. I think that, for all the yellow in the middle of the city, the established single-family low density, the use is probably more important to be clear on that. But if we're talking about the opportunity areas and the commercial areas, that's where I think we're intended to be much more broad and flexible in terms of the mix of uses that go in there.
Ms. Jones.
Matt Jones, Louisville. To the fiscal analysis idea, thank you for asking. It reminds me of when I was in my 40s and I went to my optometrist and he told me he did an eye test and he told me I need glasses, but you might need progressive lenses later on, and now I do have progressive lenses. And so since you're going to have change in vision, you don't need glasses, Matt. You need to know this information. The city already has a structural deficit in their budget. You might have heard about it. To make a wise decision for this, you need that snapshot in time. Yeah, it's going to change. Everything changes. But I can't understand why you wouldn't do it, because what it'll amount to if it goes south, and it very likely, well, I think with 50 to 60% increase in housing, it's going to go south. You're going to cut services or raise taxes. Neither of those are popular, and we enjoy great services in this city, and we have a decent tax burden. A lot of people complain about property taxes already, for good reason. But you need to know that information. Yeah, it's not perfect, but why go blind? I just don't get it. You need that information before you can make an informed decision to do right by the residents of this town that don't want to pay more property tax and want to have continued good services.
Thank you. Ms. Krantz? Yeah.
I so appreciate you letting the public be part of this discussion. It's really nice. It's really interesting about the financial thing. And I don't understand why. I probably don't understand a lot about financial analysis. I understand how we did fiscal analysis for particular developments. But it seems like perhaps in this comprehensive plan, we could do like a back of the envelope type of thing so that we know that we're not going to run into the problems that we see in the headlines. Like I'm just looking at this one from Erie, like I think it said $100 million in debt and growth projections, and they were recently, there was a lot of headlines recently with Erie having extensive growth and not having enough police officers. So I mean, it just seems like we should be able to figure out just basic back of the envelope how much it costs per resident, and if we increase our residents by 100%, which I want to talk a little bit more about what the actual numbers are. I think that it seems like something that we could just do some back of the envelope, reality check on that. And the other thing I just wanted to add is I was just speaking to Jeff and Rob about this was like when I'm hoping that you guys will dig a little bit deeper and understand that this 4,000 to 5,000 number that's in the comprehensive plan is a midpoint. And that midpoint is based on 10 to 80% growth. And so I'm concerned that like when you guys make development decisions and you look at the comprehensive plan and say, is this compatible with the comprehensive plan? I mean, even though it's just an estimate, the comprehensive plan shows these land uses with larger growth than what we're showing in the summary. So for example, like I mean, I understand why this happened, because Rob just explained it to me, but the Avista lot, we're assuming 0 growth. But the land use category is RC, which means 30 to 40 dwelling units per acre. Apparently, Avista doesn't want to have any dwelling units, but if it's going to be zoned residential with 30 to 40 dwelling units per acre, we don't know if that could be subdivided in the future, and I don't know if it's fair to assume that that's always going to be 0. I mean, why not make it so it's really straightforward? That land use, maybe just make a new hospital land use type or something like that. But if you're going to call it regional center that allows up to 40 dwelling units per acre, then somebody's going to come along and say that's our use by right, just in case. So I think it's better to be more explicit and to really, for you guys to look at the actual map and see what the assumptions are for each area. Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, so the development impact fees and the reevaluation of those, how much do you envision that exercise taking into account these types of issues?
So, yeah, so development impact fees are a very specific fee that pay for capital infrastructure to maintain level of service. And so they are calibrated to typically do that. So that's the intent. And so there's different categories.
So like, as an example, I know that includes the rec center, essentially, those services, right?
So it could include things like the rec center. And then also when new residents come in, they do still pay taxes. So when you do a fiscal model and fiscal impact analysis, you do look at what those residents bring into the city from sales tax and property tax and the use tax from the new construction of the buildings, both commercial and residential, and all of that. And then you look at what the city costs are, and then you can look at what infrastructure is needed. Now, the fiscal impact models that we've done in the past also include the development impact fees. So there is new revenue coming into the city. From a residential development standpoint, too, again, these fiscal impact models are full of assumptions, and they're static models. The one we've had most recently, you can play around with the numbers, but it's really difficult to have legitimate models that you can have some confidence in. But they give you a general direction of where you could be going. What we saw most recently with our fiscal impact models were that based on the value of homes in the city, there is a breaking point where they do pay for themselves. And I think the last time I checked, it was somewhere around, I was looking at my notes, around $850,000 per unit. You start breaking even on our assumption-filled fiscal impact model. So,
Sorry, so $850,000.
Yeah, like a home,
family home,
yeah.
or yeah.
And don't take all of these.
Right,
like I'm just
yeah,
throwing numbers out there to describe concepts. So don't take the numbers for anything. But there is a breaking point, is the point, where residential development actually might pay for itself. But also, there's different trends that have been happening since we originally did our fiscal impact model, which I think we started around 2015, and we've updated it over the years, namely internet sales. So the city's actually been collecting significantly more internet sales tax. There's been new legal precedents that require internet sales providers to remit taxes into the state. The state has a relatively new collection system. The city is getting much, much more internet sales tax. That continues to trend up per household. So that really starts to replace some of the brick and mortar requirements for fiscal balance in the city as well. So again, none of these are perfect or drive assumptions, but more than ever, having residential development, because of our property values and because of internet sales, we're closer to a fiscal balance. Now, if all of our housing that we built over the next 5 or 10 years was, honestly, if it was, $500,000 units, and we put a lot of demand on our rec center services and all those other services, we probably could be in a deficit. But there's a lot that goes into that, because if we develop these nice new mixed-use neighborhoods that we're hoping to do, slowly, incrementally, over 20 years, they create vibrant places where businesses want to be. So not only are we bringing in residences and hopefully mixed income to meet our other goals of affordable housing, but we are creating neighborhoods and business districts where businesses want to be. And so you start to get some synergy for economic growth. So if you look at McCaslin and Centennial Valley, we've had static commercial zoning over hundreds of acres that there's absolutely no market support for. There's no markets. We've done market studies. There's no market support for big boxes. There's very little market support for small retail. So those areas will remain stagnant, and the businesses will continue to struggle there without doing something different. And you know, commercial zoning's commercial zoning. There's only so much you can do. We don't want McCaslin to, you know, McCaslin's never going to be a thoroughfare like 287 or something like that, where you're bringing in this massive amount of traffic that supports large format retail. It's a very unique business ecosystem in the McCaslin corridor. So for years, we've been looking at, you know, we've been working with, you know, economic consultants to do studies. Over the last couple comp plans, we did the Parcel O study, and their conclusion was the best thing you can do economically for this district is to do mixed-use development. You make it a vital place, you bring in residents, it actually supports the businesses, and you're going to maximize the amount of businesses and commercial revenues that the city's going to get by transitioning towards those mixed-use districts. That's what the third-party experts are telling us as well.
Great, that's actually tremendously helpful to take into account. Yes, welcome up.
I'm Catherine Smith. I just wanted to make one point about the complexity of this dynamic that we're discussing, and to make you aware that there are 2 homes in my neighborhood that are second homes, where the people, in one case, they come and go kind of at random from my perspective. And in the other case, they just come in the summer. And there's a different set of problems that comes with that. And we haven't had any discussion of whether my neighborhood is indicative of a trend in the city or whether it's an outlier.
Interesting, thank you. Yes, welcome up, Ms. Bedell.
Still another item, don't we?
Yeah.
Hi, Cindy Bedell. I live in Ward 2, Louisville. So just a couple comments that tag on to some things I heard tonight. So I do think quality of life for the current residents should be one of the most important measures. I don't know if you've read Deepak Chopra, but he wrote a book about happiness. And he said, once you have your basic financial needs met, having more money does not make you more happy. So as far as I know, the city of Louisville has been in the black with our budget. I haven't looked at last year's, but up to now, when I've looked at the annual budget reports, I think we've been doing well. So my question is, should we add 50 to 60% more population growth that could decrease the quality of life for current residents? Or is a certain amount of economic vitality and doing what we can to support our businesses, is that enough? As a previous planning commissioner said one time, the quickest way to degrade quality of life is spending more time sitting in traffic. So I think what we need is a balance. We need to encourage economic vitality, which I believe we already have in many ways. But our important measure maybe is not always money. Maybe it's not always growth. Maybe it's not always more. How many more rooftops can we cram in with this kind of tired, worn out trope I've been hearing for 10 or 15 years, ever since I've retired and started coming to meetings, that we need more and more and more and more. Well, maybe we don't. Maybe we need enough to be vital. Maybe we need careful planning, and maybe quality of life is one of the most important measures. As long as our basic needs are met, we're in the black. And another comment I want to make is about the trail crowding and competition. So I have to tell you, the first semester I worked at CU, I was walking across the crowded pathways there, and this woman passed me on a bike, and she had this giant sign on her rear end, and it said, left, left, left. And I didn't get over left fast enough, and she ran me over. So when I think about that, I think about, well, what if we increase our number of bikers on our trails, say by my house in Hillsborough West, from 100 to 200? What if we increase the number of dog walkers from 100 to 200? The number of families with strollers from 100 to 200? So now you've basically doubled the conflicts that you're going to have with people on the trail. So I find right now when I walk the trails every day as a pedestrian, a dog walker, a regular bicyclist, and an e-biker, I think people are generally very polite and civil. We try to be considerate, get out of each other's way. But if we become very overcrowded, with more overcrowding and more anonymity, become less civil. So I just want to add that to my comments about adding too many more residential units to 8 square miles will put a lot of increase on parks, rec, open space, and trails. And quality of life also has to do with our social interactions. So thank you.
Thank you. And also, just to warn you also, next time when we're hearing this as a resolution, I won't be able to open it up as free play as we are this evening, but thanks for going along with it. Additional commissioner questions, discussions, comments, concerns, direction for staff. That's what we're here for. Yes.
I kind of have a concluding statement that I didn't have that many comments on the comprehensive plan because as I was reading it, I thought to myself, this is what we've been talking about. This is what I heard in the community meetings. So I think they did a fine job.
Thank you.
I want to echo that. I wanted to say, one of the questions was, is it readable? Is it clear? And I think it is. I think it's greatly, improved from the first drafts we saw. And I think it does capture, I think the spirit and the content that we were wanting to get across largely. And so I really just want to commend you all. I appreciate the huge amount of work that went into this.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I can add to that. I think it was I forget what the comment was, but it's certainly more readable than I thought it was going to be. Just given the density of material there and the amount of work that's been done. One thing that I did want to applaud in particular that I don't think was mentioned is I think the opportunity areas and looking at the future land use map, based on the conversations I think we've had and my own experience with the community engagement, I think that is very reflective of what we talked about. In terms of the integration of the residential mixed use and this new flex, it's the purple color on the map. I think that was well laid in. Circling back to a comment about evacuation routes that I resonated with, I think that would be something that's worth expanding upon in the report. And one of the reasons why I like and I'm applauding the opportunity areas and the uses that are designated is I think they would play well with future evacuation planning, particularly in the Centennial Valley and the Red Tail Ridge developments. I'll also just
Yeah, please.
pause. Okay. In terms of the growth figure, I did not have a chance to go back and look at the last version as it pertained to numbers and look at the survey results, but I do agree with the comment that the scale of the growth is larger than I was expecting based on what I recall from community engagement survey and previous discussions. I share a lot of the concerns about the rapid growth. I'm certainly a fan of manageable incremental growth, but looking at an absolute magnitude of 50%, even over 20 years, seems large to me. I absolutely resonate with the comment upon the erosion of the quality of services or the increase in tax. So I think that needs to be managed. That's not saying I'm against growth. I think there's a sweet spot to be had to address some of our goals with affordable housing, and address some of the other issues we've talked about. That's not to say I don't know what the right answer is. I'm just commenting that I think I agree with what was said that if you rolled out a 50% growth metric to the community, I think the feedback would be that's larger than they were anticipating. I think a lot of people like myself are in favor of some growth, but that might be a little larger. And I would anticipate that being a large source of discussion in the following dates you've identified.
Two side issues that pop into mind. One is it possible that you can pass on to public safety? I feel like we should have in our monthly city newsletter a discussion of the emergency routes and how an evacuation would be handled in the future, given lessons learned from the past. I would love to hear more about that. I know that's a totally different department, but for the time being. Also, we used to have a document. It was and actually it might still exist, buried in planning commission member kind of introductions. And it kind of listed a hierarchy for, zoning, code, different development guidelines. And so what I'm encouraged by is I think we're going to end up with a comprehensive plan here that's more usable and relied upon than either of the past two that I've dealt with. And so I think this is really good, but I think it's also important for everybody to understand where this kind of fits in as to which documents, reign supreme and down from there. So that would be helpful, I think, for all of us. Additional?
I'll add my 2 cents without talking too long here. Kudos to you guys. A lot of work in this. I know you've been engaging with the consultant and a lot of internal resources for the last couple of years. I do think that it is, I like how you put it, Jeff, a 95% product. A little bit of refinement needed, but it's in really good shape. I don't know what you can take from this comment or how it can even be applied. But I think a lot of the information and the data that are contained within the plan can be taken in a number of different ways, and people are going to read what they want to read out of it. I think there is a way to read the plan that says, man, we're going to have 60% growth over the next 20 years, and that's unsustainable, and we're going to be, fiscally, going in the wrong direction, and that's really unfortunate. And somebody else might read the plan and say, okay, there's an opportunity for, a realistic maybe 20% population growth and housing development, and, at least we're thinking about that now. Those perspectives, right, no matter how flat the pancake, there are always two sides. Like there are both of those perspectives contained in the plan. I think that however it can be contextualized and conveyed to the residents of Louisville, I would encourage you to find opportunity to continue to kind of recognize that there are multiple interpretations that can come from the same black and white text on the page. We talk about this and Commissioner Ritchie's point of saying the metric of, housing units per acre, right, in terms of how we identify that growth. I say this taking full responsibility of having 2 kids who drive cars and park on the street. In my cul-de-sac at any given time, there are 5 or 6 cars parked on the street, not in garages or on driveways. That doesn't mean that the number of houses in my cul-de-sac have gone up or that the number of housing units has increased. It just means that there are more people living in those houses. And, we could have the same population growth increase in Louisville without having any more housing units. It would just become a whole lot more dense, and we would have the same problems that are identified, or kind of talked about in terms of apprehension of having that development. And so, when I look at this, it's not a strategy for getting 60% growth in 20 years. It's a plan to accommodate for what happens if that comes to fruition, right? I growing up in Colorado, I would drive up and down I-25 when I was a kid, and you were lucky to see another car between Colorado Springs and Denver. And now it's a completely different story. And I wish that the transportation planners back in the 70s and 80s had thought about, well, I wonder what happens if we have 400% more people here, in 40 years, and we can, not build the church for Easter Sunday, but plan for that potential growth. Like, I see this as a good strategy to plan for the inevitability of more people and create effective mitigation strategies so that we get the good with the bad, since it's always a balance point. So if you could just wrap that all up and put it in the plan, that'd be great. Again, I don't know how you take that, but I think that a lot of it comes down to interpretation and messaging, and I think that is just as important as the content that's actually in the document.
Piggyback on that if I can and say, I think that's a really good point, and that may be a way to contextualize this, just to say that the point of this document is to provide us a framework for if this much development is to happen in the future. Like, we're not, it's, I think you make a really good point that it can be read that way, and it has been obviously read that way, to say that we want 60% growth, as opposed to we want to have plans and a framework in place in case we get to that point. Doesn't mean we're going to get there. And there might be ways to say that up front that makes that more clear, that that's the purpose of this.
Completely agree, and I am fully on board with planning ahead and making sure that, if we're going to do it, here's how we should do it in a thoughtful way. To put a finger on it, I think the document's presented as a 20-year vision. So I think that could be the source of why people would read it that way. This is a 20-year vision, and then they flip ahead and say, oh, it's 50% growth. Well, that's not my vision. Well, that's what someone could say, is what I mean. And so I completely agree with what Commissioner Choi is saying, but I think if it's being presented as a 20-year vision, I think the people of Louisville will be very interested, certainly if the Planning Commission and others are going to be looking at it as a planning document for decision-making. It would be good to know what the current thought is of what that should be.
Right. Yeah. Is it a 20-year vision that we want that much growth, or is it just a 20-year vision to address how we do growth in the future?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Is
that distinction making sense?
Is the vision the process and how you would do it, or is the vision the end result?
I'm curious if you guys have any questions of us before we wrap.
I don't have a question, but I want to publicly acknowledge Jeff's effort on this. I mean, starting in June and July of this year, when we did our last check-in, he's done an incredible job and, bringing this close to the finish line. And he really honored all of the boards and commissions, all the public input, all the planning commission, all the city council input. It's a lot, and it's very complex. It's hard to suss out the most meaningful things, and I think it was just an amazing job to get us here to this point. So I just want to thank him.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. All right. Yep.
Sorry. Again, kudos to you all, but especially this is a tremendous amount of work. And I really want to, I think, echo what Commissioner Choi was saying, right? I think that there's, I think people are keying in on maybe kind of these like big numbers, but I think when you read the plan, there's a lot of backstops in here. There's a lot of guidance. There's a lot of policies, I think, that will make sure that, should this development occur in Louisville, that it's occurring in the right way, in the right locations. It's got the appropriate backstops in conversation around infrastructure and compatibility, and I don't think, as we all know, I think, the market is going to react to this plan in some way. And I think if we've, over-calibrated it, this is an amendable plan, right? Because this is a 20-year vision. If we, recognize in a couple of years, like, oh my goodness, we really overshot on this one thing, or we're really struggling with something, we can fix these things, right? So I like the idea of the 20-year vision, but these are living documents too. So I guess I just throw that out as a little bit as a safety net. But again, great work. I think it gets 95% of these things right, and we're anxious to hear from everyone as it goes out to the public and see where this lands. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. With that then, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you all. Appreciate your comments throughout the evening and email. And we'll just jump into our next issue here, which is a little bit more formal. Yes. So I will now open the public hearing on a request for a recommendation to City Council for an amendment to the Louisville Municipal Code Title 17 to allow electric vehicle charging stations as a primary land use in the city's non-residential zoning districts, and to update the approval process for these facilities. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. Procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there'll be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission staff. After this presentation, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person by computer or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak in person is asked to complete a speaker card. Use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. 2 people present at the meeting may pool their minutes to allow 1 person to speak for up to a total of 6 minutes. Purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony. Is not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing, or the applicant is the staff, will be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close public hearing and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. Planning Commission will discuss the matter, may approve with conditions, deny, table, or continue to a specific future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and city of residence. Does anyone participating in this hearing object to the procedure I've described? Seeing none, can you speak to notification, please?
Yes, notification has been met for this case.
And do we have any disclosures from Planning Commission? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay, so this is a fairly targeted amendment to Title 17 of the zoning code, addressing EV charging facilities as a land use. And I'll get into the reasons why we need to do this code amendment. At a high level, it allows EV charging facilities as a primary use in all of our non-residential zone districts, as distinguished currently from predominantly being an accessory use. And it doesn't establish an approval process that is primarily administrative for EV charging facilities as a primary use and an accessory use to some degree. We'll get into that. And to clarify, there's no changes proposed to like the number of EV charging spaces required or the type or any of that. None of that substance is being touched. This is about the land use itself and where it's allowed. So in terms of the catalyst for this code amendment, there is one of the many state laws addressing EV charging. It specifically says that essentially cities have options for complying with the law. But it does explicitly say that the city has to take action on EV charging, provide some more flexibility. The House bill has a goal of reducing barriers to EV charging facilities, and at a high level requires clear land use regulations for all types of EV charging facilities, which we are close but not quite there in terms of complying with the bill. Strongly encourages administrative approval abilities for EV charging facilities in this bill. There's basically, the way the bill is set up, there's 3 compliance options for the city. One is to basically adopt a model code that the state has for EV charging, which is lengthy and complex. Another approach is to adopt our own sort of locally tailored regulations that meet the intent of the law, which is what we're proposing to do. And then another option would be for us to just fully opt out of it, which would be requiring a resolution by council formally stating we don't want to do this. So we're opting for option 2, which is to locally tailor our regulations to comply with the law. So our current EV charging regulations as it relates to this amendment in terms of the allowable, it being an allowable land use, we obviously permit them, but we really focus on them being an accessory use. So when you think about a large parking lot, underutilized EV charging facility going in, or accessory to like the 7-Eleven, things like that, obviously allowed and mandated in some cases. The real issue is that in our current code, if you wanted to do it as a primary land use, so if that was your own freestanding land use, this doesn't really exist yet regionally or really in Colorado, and it barely exists anywhere I can find in the US, but it is an emerging trend. I'll show some images to have these more sort of primary facilities. And so that's where the issue is in terms of defining it as a primary land use. Basically, there's a short provision in the code that says that if it was a primary land use, we would consider it a gas station. And the issue with that is that we have a cap on the number of gas stations in the city currently. And so in effect, you could not build an EV charging facility as a primary land use currently. That's really the crux of the issue here. And so here's some images just giving you examples of what we're talking about. So on this table on the left is sort of what you commonly see today when you see it as an accessory use to a primary use. The images on the right are some examples of what as a primary land use an EV charging facility would look like. So it would operate similar to a gas station. You have a lot less of the impacts, which we'll get into a little bit. So some of the key elements of the proposal are, again, to allow EV charging facilities as a primary land use by right in our non-residential zone districts. Again, no change to the development and design standards that apply So number of EV charging still the same, the design, the type still the same. All the other standards for like commercial, if it's commercial, would apply in terms of design, lighting, all of that. None of that's changing. One of the big changes, and to comply with the law, it does explicitly allow that if you were to do an EV charging facility as a primary land use, that would be an administrative approval of a PUD. So most, as you know, commercial development requires a PUD, public hearings, preliminary and final. This would explicitly allow within certain parameters EV charging as an administrative approval, as long as there's no waivers being requested, no variances, all the standards are being met, and there's a size threshold of 1 acre, I believe, in the ordinance for that as well. Another important element of this proposal is that, so if you have an existing PUD and you want to put EV charging as an accessory use, like in an underutilized part of your parking lot, if that triggers a PUD amendment, that PUD amendment would also be administrative every time. With those parameters around.
Maybe I can ask a question at this point. So on that note, right, if somebody was building it as a standalone, essentially a gas station, even, I mean, I haven't seen one yet, but if there was a convenience store associated with it, maybe 1 acre, they would push into that larger size, and so it wouldn't become administrative at that point. And one of my driving concerns is light pollution from the charging units themselves. It seems to have been popular lately for a lot of them to have a fair amount of light glowing from these units. And so I'm a little concerned about that, especially when it comes to adjacency issues with residential in particular.
Well, we certainly have lighting standards in the code, and they would have to comply with that. And so part of this is that you couldn't request any waiver or variance to any of those standards. It would automatically kick it into a public hearing process.
But
So
I
they
don't
would
think
have-
our code addresses that glow. If you go back to the pictures there, maybe you can go back to that one, and, well, they're not nighttime photos. Kind of the one on the right is, I think they're glowing green, bottom right. But if you can imagine that, even without the rooftop above it, would you foresee that that could become administratively approved?
Can I ask a clarifying question? I think you're talking about maybe some of these new EV chargers, like the units themselves, not maybe like the site lighting, which we have standards for, but like the
Yeah.
units themselves oftentimes have like bright LED strips around the edge so that people see them. Is that maybe more what?
The green, yeah,
Yeah.
the different colors we've seen for different operators.
Okay. Happy to discuss that. I can keep going, or we can have that as part of the
Yeah,
discussion.
I'm just curious how you would address that within an administrative PUD as opposed to if they had to come in front of us and we freaked out.
I mean, I don't know our lighting standards as well as I should, but, you know, certainly that it would have to comply with the light pollution and light spillover that we have in our code. And if it doesn't, then they'll kick it into a public hearing process.
I think our code requires all cutoff lighting for commercial, but our code has limitations.
Right,
on-
these essentially function as internally lit signs. And they're not that. I don't think the code would look at them as that, even though that's essentially.
Yeah,
what
I don't
they-
know that we would allow it. I mean, that's my initial reaction, is I don't know that we would allow LED strip lighting or glowing pedestals. They might have a screen on them,
Yeah,
like
no,
a
that's
like
different.
a
No,
gas
I'm talking
pump,
about-
right? So
Yeah.
I think that might not be allowed. So we would hold the same standard. I do think what's different, and we will be updating our design standards as we talked about, is that what we've done with the PUDs, honestly, is we've pushed developments to do, because we don't have like color temperature, and we've pushed them to do lower level lighting than our CDDSG or CDDSG might allow. So it's a little more difficult to do that when it's a straight administrative approval and they're not
Right.
asking for any waivers, so I would acknowledge that. And I would just say that not only a short few years ago, we tried to update for dark sky lighting and it wasn't adopted, so we don't have a policy
Right,
on
that's what I'm
dark sky
concerned
lighting.
about.
I know we like it,
Yeah.
but we can't force people to do it. And our city council, at least just a few years ago, was not interested in adopting additional standards.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm not even pushing it to dark sky, I'm pushing it to that glow.
So I do have a question though, because probably agree with you that I think the sign standards and the illumination, like limitations and requirements. Sorry, I'm still thinking back to the 4-hour discussion we had about the sign last month. You know, I think that would probably still apply to these things in the case of this, but and I think about that in terms of the context of any other scenario for a retail location, right, would have to comply with those sign requirements, the sign standards. Why is it that these would be treated as gas stations as opposed to just some other, you know, retail category? Right, but I'm saying why are they technically gas stations?
Right now, because that's all we have to go on.
It's-
That's how the cookie crumbles.
We've decided, you're talking about it as a land use, are you talking about it as a land use versus, or are you talking about the design that we apply to that between the two?
Both.
Either? As a land use, that's just, that is what is in the regulations today. We explicitly say, we're gonna treat this the same as a gas station. And I don't know what the rationale was. We looked at operational characteristics, similar, we're always looking for uses that are similar.
Sure.
But the design standards would apply. Go ahead, Mark.
And honestly, we've never had one. So we've never had to apply the code. So we're just speculating
Yeah.
that would be the next closest thing.
No, and that's what I'm looking at
Yeah.
too, is if it was a gas station, we're going to be looking at traffic patterns, we're going to be looking at different issues associated with the standard gas station, 24-hour operations, concerns with adjacencies as it relates to that. So I'm a little concerned that we might be jumping too far forward. Because, I envision a future where we do have EV charging stations that are exactly like gas stations are right now without the gasoline.
Well, if you're, go ahead. If you're talking about you're talking about things that are standards, right? So lane widths, access points, circulation, turning radii, those are all things that are codified standards that our engineers look at as part of a site plan review. It just would be done administratively versus in a public hearing process. And if they vary from any of those, so if they want to do something that is narrower in terms of a drive aisle, or the queuing is different than what we allow, then that bumps it into the needing a public hearing.
If we didn't have a cap on gas stations, I don't think we would be allowing gas stations to be approved administratively.
I think we're looking at these as a different land use per the state law we are trying to comply with, but also operationally, it's cleaner. There's no fuel storage. There's no on-site attendant typically. They are a bit different. Yeah, quieter.
Yeah.
Odors
But they
less.
could be I don't know if that has a convenience store associated with it or not, but at some point in the future, they could include a standard build-out like a gas station with EV charging instead.
There's so many unknowns. I personally had a hard time finding any examples of these anywhere in America. These images are conceptual. These aren't real places. These are conceptual images of proposals from companies. Is the best I could find.
I think we've seen,
There's one down in Salida. It's in a parking lot, but it's a standalone thing, and it has
one
a
at
cover
Target.
like this. It's not as big as the one in this picture, but it has a cover like this. But they're rare.
well, no, there's one over in the Target parking lot that's similar to the bottom left photo.
But that would be accessory, not primary.
Bottom left photo
right?
is the
Yeah.
accessory use.
Yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know, is that land still owned by Target? I don't know, yeah.
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 You would know. Thank you.
I do wonder, though, if I recall and maybe just a statement that, to commission, and I had not even thought about this, but, we have regulations in our sign code for internally illuminated cabinet signs and glare next to adjacent properties and for kind of lighting standards for electronic message centers, right? So maybe just a little bit of a thought that, we treat these as, if it's more than just the number, where you're punching in your payment, right, that the standards for sign illumination apply. Just, yeah.
Something that I think it's important because those companies will consider that part of their branding. It doesn't have signage language on them, that glowing color, and it's integral to the units that they install. They're not going to install a special one for Louisville but they may find a way to address that. I mean, there's the same thing over in the mall parking lot. That is similar to that. It's an accessory at that point, but it's
Yeah.
that, so, all right. So, sorry, continue on.
Yeah, I don't think there's too many slides left here. We've talked about most of this. Started to talk about some of the impacts, positive impacts, right? More potential accessibility to EV charging facilities in the community. When you look at the comparison to a typical gas station, they are different, less odor, less noise. Trips are a little bit different. There's no on-site attendant, usually things like that, no fuel storage on site. So they're a bit different, a bit cleaner, quieter. And then just to call out that we certainly have policies supporting this action from the city, primarily in the Sustainability Action Plan to look at supporting these types of facilities. And I think that was about it, yeah, in terms of the context. But yeah, we are recommending approval of the ordinance for city council, and happy to talk more about the issues with lighting or however you'd like to go with this.
Yeah, I guess I am still hung up on that a bit. For example, right, there's a couple of outlots in front of, what do we call it now, Rocky Mountain, Tappan Garden, Ziggy's, that, right? So if somebody wanted to build one of these there, that light pollution could be a concern for 20, right? These are 24-hour operation. So are you prepared to deal with that as currently proposed?
Right, so we do have the photometric standards in the CDDSG, so that's what we'd apply, I think, in a similar way that you all do. And I think that if it complies, and you would all probably pass that as well, if it complied. It's only if they're not complying or asking for a waiver, like the Red Tail Ridge Pump Station, right? Like they were outside of the bounds of the code, so you could not accept that and require that they change that. So staff would be doing the exact same thing that you're doing. If we weren't comfortable with it, or if it was going outside of the bounds of the code, then I think it would go to a public hearing anyways.
Okay.
So I think the key is to have better design guidelines as well. And dark sky standards ultimately.
Yeah.
But I don't think that, we would have the same authority you all would have as far as saying yes or no to a lighting plan for this use or a gas station.
Your decision is not subject to public input.
Unless it's over an acre.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, but that's, when we present those cases to you, we're presenting that they're complying with the regulations.
But if you get public input and says, I don't like the lighting, but it complies with the design standards,
Right, we don't
you
have
can't
anything to stand on
not
it.
pass it either.
Yeah.
really.
Well, so then I think that just raises an important component of code overhaul to address this directly, maybe? Yeah.
And I mean, the packet still identifies too, right? In the eventuality that someone does come along and say, hey, we want to have a primary land use for this EV charging station, there's still going to be notification, there's still going to be, public awareness of it, and the way the packet's
Not if
written.
it's administrative.
Well, for any development, there has to be, there will be a submission that anybody who is really interested in keeping tabs on is going to be made aware of.
As part of the administrative process, there's no public notification. Right.
If it meets all the standards, no, there would not, and it's under 1 acre, no, there would not be public notification. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was trying to bring, attention to the element in the way that it's written about, director may require a PUD with public hearings if a proposed facility is determined to have the potential for major impacts. So there's a level of discretion where,
yes,
there's just got to be the recognition that Rob can do his job.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's important to note that provision is in
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And the ability to sort of kick it up.
Pitch it publicly at any point if you want to. Yes, Commissioner Mahaley.
Can I poke a bit about the option space? Could you go back to the slide that had the ways to comply with the House bill? So, because I think there were 3 or 4, and I think we were with the tailored approach. So, Am I correct in assessing that the locally tailored is sort of the least aggressive form of compliance? You know, because it sounds like I'm assuming that adopting the model state regulations would be a lot easier than what we're describing now. Is that a fair assessment? Like where you could just sort of put it anywhere without.
I would actually say it'd be. I don't know that. I don't know if I would say it would be easier because the model code is complex and large, and to bring that all into our systems and have it sort of fit is going to be really complex and also more complex to administer. I think that model code is more designed. So you think about a statewide bill, it's got to cover places like Louisville and places like Lyman and, you know, places that are presumably have none of the stuff on the books currently.
So for the sake of discussion, could you help us understand what for this approach, the tailored approach, because the way it's written, it says that the tailored approach that meets the intent and minimum requirements of the House bill.
Yeah.
Right. And so you've outlined what the criteria would be for administrative approval. Like, are those the knobs, the size? Like, what are the knobs that we can actually impose on this that would still meet, quote, the intent and minimum requirements of HB 241173?
These bills are like we're learning more and more. It's really a moving target in terms of how hard the state is going to push to evaluate if our regulations actually meet the. So like we're learning this with ADUs and other bills. Like it almost depends on the staff person you're working with if they feel it complies with the bill. So it's a lot of unknowns with it. But the bill does say at minimum that we would like to see the primary land use issue that we're talking about today and administrative approvals. I think from our perspective, our EV charging ordinance is further along and more progressive than most cities. And so we already have that infrastructure in place in terms of mandating the number of spaces and the types and everything like that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Well, what I'm getting is like we can have a discussion on requirements and what can and can't, you know, pass the bar.
Right, but
Are
it
these
doesn't have
even?
to be administrative approval.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
That's not a required aspect of state law.
And what I'm poking at is what are the requirements of what we can actually do and not do here? Because we can have a discussion of what we want, but what actually flies.
Right,
Right.
yeah. Well, but we don't have to have administrative approval for it to fly, do we? To meet, in our current interpretation
Yeah.
of state requirements.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty ambiguous bill and with these three paths because the sort of the third path is we as a city can opt completely out of it and say via resolution we're deciding to do nothing about this bill, and that complies. So that tells you right there that there's not much of in terms of teeth it feels like in the bill to say, well, you're not complying because you're only doing this or that.
Right, because
Yeah.
I might take a different approach and say I am comfortable with administrative approval on these types of land use applications. I think to your point, I don't know that I can't think of any where I've seen this use as a primary primary use on a lot, where this is literally the only thing on a lot. I do though, and I hadn't thought of that, I do appreciate your comment about impacts from lighting. I don't think we're going to see significant impacts from traffic. And to your point, we have PUD criteria, you know, that talk about traffic and utilities and things like that. But I do think it might be helpful if it's not clear to staff, you know, how you would regulate the cabinet, because I have seen them and they are very bright, right? And it is part of their branding. So if it's not clear how you would make sure that that lighting isn't going to negatively impact folks, maybe even just a statement, right? Lighting shall be, you know, not visible or buffered from adjacent residential, right? I think that could be something that you could add to this code if we don't already have those tools.
Well,
But
and I mean, I think I have an associated question or a question kind of along the same lines. So, you know, if part of the intention of this is to say, hey, we don't want these to be considered gas stations, which we're at our 5, right? Or +1. Did we add the +1 with the King Super? Okay.
we lost one downtown.
Right, but that's zeroed out.
Right, but that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I thought King
that was the
Supers had
aside.
an exception though.
They do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
they
it was
Yeah.
it was accessory
As
to
an
us.
as an accessory. Sorry, that was an aside. If the intention is we don't want to treat these as gas stations, right, and we want to create a new land use that doesn't currently exist right now, my question, kind of along the same lines, is what, you know, the packet says, hey, it has to meet, you know, development and design standards, and it'll go through this administrative, you know, approval. Like, what are those standards? What are those development, which of our current existing things are being applied to it? Because, are we going to end up, is there a potential where there's some sliver of land, where you can fit 2 cars and there are 2 parking or 2 charging stations and, that's the primary use and that gets developed and then we do run into some of these issues of like incompatibility or?
Sorry,
I mean,
go
I
ahead
think
and
it
answer
would
that.
usually be commercial. The commercial design standards and guidelines would apply.
Yeah, it's going to be the commercial, the sign code, so all those standards. Does that answer your question? It would be the CDDSG, and then, which includes a lighting section, and then the sign code apply. It doesn't apply to gas, it's a content neutral sign code, so it applies to like structure types, like canopies and things like, and monument signs.
And would all of that be defined in the update to Title 17 we're talking about, right? Yeah.
So, no, but staff would be reviewing it with the same criteria that you review it.
Okay.
So it'd be the PUD criteria, the design guidelines, the sign code, primarily. And then I just.
So it has to be commercial.
And so what I wanted to mention too is I know you had your last study session with City Council where we talked about the development code update. What we talked about and what we're going to be processing here this year are interim development review standards that include significant extension of administrative approvals of commercial PUDs for single lots, applying the same standards that you all apply and distinguishing that from PUDs for bigger developments. And so I just wanted to mention, this is consistent with that concept, that this is a minor development on a small lot. We have standards in place. If they agree to meet those standards, it could be done administratively. If it doesn't meet the standards, they have to have a public hearing and you all are reviewing it if they need waivers and those types of things. So I think that's, something to think about just in the context of this is something we were all very comfortable and excited about a couple months ago when we had the study session. Certainly we have work to do on our design standards and our design guidelines. That'll, I think, will give us a bigger level of comfort for doing administrative reviews that we need to get to as well.
Thank you for that. No? With that, then, is it?
I have one very lawyerly thing to say about the definition of electronic vehicle charging stations, and I don't know whether this is intentional, and this is very nitpicky, but you say it means a designated parking facility with parking spaces that are provided. Do you mean to say it is a facility with parking spaces that are provided? Or is it a parking facility with parking spaces? I'm just looking at the red line.
It's 9 o'clock right now. I'm trying to come in my head right now the distinction between the two of those. Like
It's very small. And it's just, again, this is just.
Well, it could matter.
Well, maybe.
I think it matters.
Is it a parking facility or is it a facility with parking spaces?
It's a
Parking spaces.
Yeah.
It's
I
like
agree.
either. I don't know which way to flip it.
I would say, I think you don't mean it to be a parking facility. It's not a parking lot, right?
Or do we need to say it's a commercial facility with parking
Means a
spaces?
commercial facility with parking spaces that are provided with a dedicated branch circuit, blah, blah, blah.
So that we're clear that the commercial standards apply.
Would that make it? I'm looking at, again, this is 172170B definition.
Yeah, I think.
That might be an important one.
Yeah, I appreciate where you're going with that.
Is the intent just to make sure that the wording is such that the commercial standards are ensured to imply? Is that the?
Yeah, my
is that the
intent is that I
tax here?
don't want it to be, it's not a parking facility.
Yeah.
It's a commercial facility with parking spaces that provide
Right.
electric charging.
It's a commercial facility where the primary activity is parking.
Right, but it's not a parking lot. It's not a parking
Is that
lot.
really parking though? I
No,
don't
the
know.
primary activity
Yeah.
is charging, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't want to call it a
Parking
designated
to
parking.
charge.
I don't want to call it a designated parking facility because it's not that.
You're parking for a service. The service just happens to be right next to your car versus if you went into a shop or something.
Yeah, I don't know that parking even needs to be in the definition.
I agree. It doesn't really need to be, but,
People park, but they park at a restaurant, they park at,
right.
And I don't think I have an appreciation for what the implications on the regulations are if it's parking. But I think the main thing is what you pointed to is that just make sure the commercial standards apply.
Make sure it's
Yeah.
clear that,
Right.
I don't know if you want to pull the language up there and look at it, but I'm looking at it on my screen.
I think it makes sense to me. I think we can amend the language. You could put it in your motion, or we can just, I think we'll end up amending it anyways, because it is a very good point, whether you put it in your motion or not.
I don't think we need it in the motion. I think you guys get it.
I think you guys got it. This is just the writer, the legal writer in me being like, I don't want to have parking in there twice. And maybe we don't need it in there at all, so.
Thank you. Never know. That could have come back to bite us when we went to administer it a year from now, you know?
As a litigator, I'm always looking for these
Yeah.
little things that might,
Yeah.
that I'll be arguing about for 4 years in a lawsuit. So.
Thank you. No, that's important. I really appreciate it. All right, with that, we still do have one person online, but Mr. Kranzorf, your hand is not raised, so I'm going to assume you do not wish to speak at this time. We don't have any written public comments regarding this, so we will just move into, that's your closing statement?
No closing statements.
Okay, thank you. I'll now close the public hearing. Planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. Why don't we begin at the far left?
I'm comfortable with the broad language in the draft. I don't know if you all feel like we need more clarity around, a condition to maybe further refine the standards related to like neon lighting on these things, or if that's something you'll look at in the future draft. But other than that, I think I'm comfortable with that.
All right, thank you.
I think I'm good. I appreciate you clarifying that the commercial standards apply.
Commissioner Basket,
I'm also comfortable with staff proposal.
Commissioner Mahaley.
I'm comfortable with it. I will admit that I had a harder time with this one, given that it seems sort of a nebulous concept as it pertained to what requirements and codes it would fall under, but I think the discussion helped alleviate those concerns, so I'll be voting yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hunt.
I'm also comfortable with this and also cognizant of the fact that this is likely going to be an iterative process as more of these things likely come in the future, hopefully come in the future. I love to see the state and our city trying to provide more space for, or the possibility for these kinds of charging stations. I think that's the way to make electric vehicles the wave of the future. And with the language change I talked about, I think I'm definitely in support of this.
Thank you. I'm also in favor of, at this time, thanks for addressing the parking with facility use. No, that's important. That's free lawyer time we got, so I appreciate that very much. So with that, I'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve Resolution 1, Series 2026.
Thank you. A second? Thank you. Roll call, please.
Okay, Commissioner Ritchie?
Yes.
Commissioner Hunt?
Yes.
Commissioner Choi?
Yes.
Commissioner Mahaley?
Yes.
Vice Chair Basket?
Yes.
And Chair Browness?
Yes. Thank you very much for all of your work on that as well. Do we have any staff comments or anything else? Planning Commission comments for anything else upcoming? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.